All right. So part D says using a method similar to the one. Let's quickly go through the context of the experiment that we did. So basically, we were doing investigation design in which we were seeing कि bananas को हमने कुछ को खाली expose किया. There are some enzymes which turn them brown, and then with some we treated some of them with acid and some of them not with the acid, and then we tested the color change and the pH change. Okay, now what he's saying is, excuse me, using a method similar to the one in this investigation, design an experiment to determine the optimum best pH for banana to turn brown. Acha. Now, what we need to understand is, and we've talked about the investigation design and its dynamics earlier also, लेकिन किसी भी experiment में, in any experiment, what we have to understand is the fact, excuse me, is the fact that any investigation design is technically supposed to contain the comparison or the cause and effect relationship between two variables known as the dependent and the independent variable. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे अब वो आपसे बेसिकली क्या ये रहा है कि wait, where's my pen? There it is. Okay. आपसे कह रहा है कि using a method similar to the one in this investigation, so you are bound to use a method that's similar. You can't just come up with your own method, okay? And you have to design an experiment in which you have to determine the optimum pH for the banana to turn brown. Okay, optimum your best pH for the banana to turn brown. So आपने इसमें क्या क्या चीजें देखनी हैं? इसमें आपने देखना है basically you have to select the best pH. What that means is that you will, as an experiment, you will vary. As an experiment, you will vary all of this. Okay, so if I were to brainstorm, I will have to first of all identify the independent variable versus the dependent variable, which are basically the two things that we see the effect of. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to identify the variables that you need to control. Okay, because there are variables that we need to control. Okay, there are variables that we need to control, and it is essential to control them because they don't affect our independent and dependent variable. ठीक है, और फिर इसके अलावा हम जो है किसी भी investigation design के अंदर we make sure that we can add as much as practical detail as we can. And last but not the least, maybe we can talk about some precautions and about repeating the experiment and so on and so forth. Okay. So हम करेंगे क्या? First of all, we will have a different range of pH solutions. ठीक है जी. अच्छा, ये वो वेरिएबल है जो कि आप खुद वेरी कर रहे हैं बिकॉज वो खुद कह रहे हैं कि हमने देखना है कि डिफरेंट किस pH पे बनाना optimally turns brown. So we will of course have different pH. So you have to ensure that the different pH that you're using they are equally spaced. Okay, so for example, by equally spaced, I mean that you have to, for example, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. ठीक है जी. वैसे तो उस क्वेश्चन में उसने एसिड के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में बात की भी है. So I mean, but again, you can select any of them. You can see that when I say they should be equally spaced, you can clearly see what I mean. And also, whenever you are selecting the values of independent variable, remember minimum just standard have a 5 है. यानी कि अगर आप, if you're trying to assess different range of anything, temperature or pH, you have to take at least 5 values. Okay. अच्छा जी, फिर हम क्या करेंगे? Again, we will take freshly cut slices. freshly cut slices, और इसमें हम ख्याल रखेंगे कि freshly cut slices equal size के हों, इसी तरह they are from the same banana, and so forth. Okay. And then what we do is we take this freshly cut slices and place them in different pH solutions that we prepared. Okay. But for how long? For equal interval of time. Okay. Basically, we don't keep them for an equal interval of time. Since in this particular scenario, we're basically trying to see कि कितने time के बाद वो brown turn होगा. So we will measure the time taken to turn brown. Time taken to turn brown. And since we are measuring the time happens to be the dependent variable in this case, because dependent variable is the one that I directly measure. Okay, so this is again something that we have talked about. All right. And जो वेरिएबल हमने ये जो हमने दो बातें की हैं, these are the controlled variables. Okay, these are the controlled variables that I'm talking about. I have controlled them in order to make sure that my result is more valid. Okay, I can also and then the pH that goes brown, I mean pH that goes brown fastest, because at the end of the day it's enzyme that's working now, so just pick सबसे कम time लगता है, या pH that grows brown fastest is going to be my optimum pH. Okay, and then I can repeat the investigation, and this repetition, always remember whenever you are mentioning repeat the investigation, marks की में आपको plus नजर आएगा, take the average or mean. ठीक है जी, and what does this do to your results? It makes your results more reliable. ठीक है, I'm going to highlight these three words. In literally any experiment, you can mention this. You can repeat the investigation and then take the mean, and it makes it more reliable. So remember, repetition makes it reliable. Both are R's. And the fact that you're controlling variables makes it valid. Okay. All right. So that's basically what the investigation design is all about. I want to quickly go through the examiner report of this excuse me, investigation design. If you can just give me a second, please. Okay. 2020 November. Okay. So this was question one part. ये था जी variant आपका कौन सा है? If I'm not mistaken, this is variant 6.1. Okay. So variant 6.1 examiner report. Uh, okay. So we are talking about the last part of the first question. And okay, so there's a lot that he has to comment about. Let's copy and paste this on our board. अच्छा चलें, इसको हम वहीं पे देख लेते हैं. यहाँ पे ये फॉर्मेटिंग का कुछ मसला कर रहा है मुझे. Okay, so very carefully, let's go through this together. It says this question, excuse me, this question required candidates to design an experiment to determine the optimum pH for banana to turn brown. Some candidates simply repeated what had already been done and calculated the mean, which would not determine the optimum pH. Credit-worthy answers, जैसे कि इंशाल्लाह आप लोगों के होंगे, involved placing freshly cut banana slices in solutions of varying pH for a given time and then removing them from the solutions and observing which of them turned brown in the least time. Some candidates incorrectly thought that the slices would change color while still immersed in the pH solution. There's one more control variable that we could add, and that is control volume and concentrations of solutions used. Okay, so Alhamdulillah, this is investigation design. Um, Generally speaking, I remember it. मैंने काफी दफा बच्चों को ये बताया कि I attended a workshop of Cambridge. उसमें paper 6 का ही examiner था, and she said that usually when the children they start studying ATP, they find the investigation design questions challenging, but this is the question in which a majority of the candidates all around the globe they score the best, and it is the graphical questions that they suffer. Okay, so let's come to the second question now. It's a graphical question. I'm going to repeat some basic stuff that you guys need to know about graphical questions. Okay, so I'm reading, please follow me carefully. A student investigated the effect uh, of exercise on her rate of breathing. Okay, so what is she seeing? Her rate of breathing. She started exercising at 2 minutes and stopped exercising at 8 minutes. यहाँ पे उसने start किया and she stopped here. That was the starting point and that's the ending point. ठीक है? The data collected is shown in the table. Okay, so you have time on the left hand side, and then you have rate of breathing per minutes, a rate of breathing slash breaths per minute on the right hand side. Now it says construct a line graph of the data on the grid below. Join your points with ruled lines. Now, what I want to do is there are 4 marks and I want to show how the marks are distributed. सबसे पहले आप आंखें बंद करके जो है well आंखों खोल के x axis को लेबल करें. Exactly write down the stuff that is written. So minutes ko MIN bhi nahi likhna. Minutes ko aap likhenge something like this, okay? And then on the y-axis you have rate of breathing. On the y-axis you have rate of breathing, and again you will slash it with the same units, breaths per minute. You don't have to write breaths per MIN. You have to write the full word, that is breaths per minute. Okay, now if I go to the mark scheme, let me quickly open the marking scheme. आप देखेंगे कि usually there are always these 4 specific points that he will have for the graphical questions. ये देखें जरा. They basically, yeah, that these are the points that they've given. The first marking point is time on x-axis, breathing rate on y-axis, plus axis fully labeled. Now, there's one thing I want you to notice. In the first marking point, he has given these plus points, which basically means if you've written this time on x-axis, and if you've written breathing on y-axis, and if you haven't fully labeled them with units, for instance, guess what? You don't score any mark. Okay, so आप देखें कि I've written time on x-axis, and remember, if you have this usual confusion in which you struggle to figure out which thing to take on which axis, then remember in the table on the extreme left side, you will always have the independent variable. Okay? And the independent variable is always supposed to be on the x-axis. Okay? The point that I'm trying to make is, whatever the case is, you have to ensure and given in the table, whatever is given in the table on the extreme left is always supposed to be on the x-axis. So aankhein band karke time ko aap le lein on x-axis, and then you take the rate of breathing slash breaths per minute on the y-axis. Now that's the first marking point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write MP here, and I'm going to give myself 1 tick. That gives me 1 mark. The reason I'm doing this because it is important you guys understand how does the marking work. Okay, now the second marking point is going to be the selection of scale. If you look at the x-axis and if you look at the independent variable table given in the graph, you will see that they have given values till 10. So simply what I'll do is I have to ensure that I use at least 60% of the given grid, ideally the entire grid. So what I'll do is I'll mark this point as 0, this as 2, this as 4, this as 6, this as 8, and this as 10. Okay? So that in that way, very easily you can see I can use the entire graph. And as for y-axis, you can clearly see that it is not starting from 0. It is starting from 14. I can use a breakpoint line, but I mean, even if I don't do that and I'm using a good space of the graph, that should be sufficient. So the maximum value is 35. So maybe what I can do is I can say that this is 10, this is 20, this is 30, and this is 40. Oh, I'm sorry. And this is 40, okay? So now, once I have selected the scale, what I'll do is I'll do the plotting. So 0 पे 14 है, 0 and 14. So this is the point. Okay. And again, once again, for plotting the points, you have an option of a dot and a circle around it. You have an option of a cross, and you just have an option of this. I usually recommend the first one. Okay. That's easier for the examiner to identify. Then against 2, you have, once again, you have 14. I'm sorry, it's this point. Okay. And then for 4, you have 24. So there you go. You have 24. And then for 6, you have 35. TKG. For 8, you have 35 once again. And for 10, you have 19. Acha ji. Now, there is one thing that we need to understand. Let's reread the question and let's see, has he given us some clear instructions about how to draw about the line? Because ideally speaking, if you haven't been told anything, then the safest way is to make ruled lines, okay? Avoid making curves, unless he has stated in the question otherwise. So it says construct a line graph, join your points with ruled straight line. So what I'll do is simply, I'll pick my ruler, okay? And I will make straight ruled lines, something like this. So I'm joining these 2 points. And then I will join the next 2 points, something like the following. And then I'll join the next 2 points, something like the following once again. And then I'll join the next 2 points, something like this. And then I will join the last 2 points with my ruler, something like the following. Okay, so I've clearly followed the instructions. I could have drawn a curve, लेकिन उसने यहाँ पे curve का कहा नहीं है, ठीक है? So once again, coming back to the marking scheme, so that's we're done with the first marking point. Second में वो कह रहा है linear scale for both axes, ठीक है जी. At least one origin labeled 0, ठीक है जी. 0 का origin जो है वो हमने देख लिया है. क्यों 0 का origin होना चाहिए? Because if you look at the values, the time value has been given 0, so I have to show 0 in some way or in some form, okay? Or plus occupying at least half of the grid. He's being generous and he's saying that bacha at least 50% of the grid use kar le, that's ideally good. So alhamdulillah, I get the second marking point. Coming to the third marking point, acha, so that was the second point, that's the third. Now all 6 points plotted correctly, yes, and ruled line between the points. So up clearly dekhen कि it's a typical set of instructions that we have for graphs that we need to follow. So alhamdulillah, I get the third marking point and I get the fourth marking point. अब वो आपसे कह रहा है in B part, use your graph to find the rate of breathing at 5 minutes. Okay, such questions are very easy because all what I have to do is I have to use my graph and reconcile what the value is. So it's saying 5 minutes. So look at my graph. 5 minutes are somewhere here. That's the 5-minute line. And what he's saying is you have to tell what's the rate of breathing. Okay, rate of breathing y-axis पे है, इसको reconcile करके देखें. And in the exam paper, you have to show it to the examiner. And how did you come about to this value? It's very important. Ruler के साथ करेंगे आप, of course. So this is somewhere around 28-ish in my answer, if I'm not wrong. And if we look, and by the way, it's a 2-mark question, which means there is something more that you need to do in order to score marks. Of course 20 उसने marks की में 29 दिया हुआ है यहाँ पे, क्योंकि वो exact मैंने नहीं किया, so it should have been 29, but this answer is incomplete. It is 29 breaths per minute. Let's make it 29. per minute. That's when you write this, you get one marking point. The second marking point is for showing the working on the graph. Okay, so you have to ensure कि एग्जाम में आप उसको working clearly दिखाएं. C part. Describe how. Okay, okay. Description hai. Again, whenever I'm reading the question, the first thing I do is I look at the glossary word, and then I look at the marks. Describe how the student could have measured her rate of breathing. Well, it's very simple. Description है simple. वो क्या कर सकती है? She can count each breath over 1 minute. I mean, simply अपनी सांस को count करना शुरू कर दे 1 minute में. That's basically how she can do the rate of breathing. And then finally, exercise increases the rate of breathing. State one other measurement that the student could have recorded to determine the full effect of exercising. Now, you have to understand when we exercise, there are two things that happen. When we exercise, we know that it's not only the rate, I'm sorry for bad spellings, it's not only the rate of breathing that increases, there is a second factor, and that is the depth of breathing, which is also, I'm sorry, which is also the volume. ठीक है? और ये भी increase करता है. So the answer here is the depth could also have been recorded. ठीक है जी.